Right. So, it's really exciting to be here with, so many wonderful women who actually are our current and future leaders as well. When we work on our areas, we always see that the reason why there's such a span of influence is the influence that women have actually extend not just at work, but at home, in terms of how they influence the way the children or the family actually evolves, both from the next generation as well as the previous generation. So we do see that women are a pillar of the household. Although there are a lot of initiatives from an equality perspective, for example, from allowing paternity leave to actually be able to spread that load, it is still something that we believe will take some time. So for now, we have to accept that we will continue to be that pillar at home, and also then have to make strides in the workplace as well. And that's why, I took the liberty of changing the title a little bit and called it Leading and Winning in an Era of Unprecedented Change. I say that because when we lead, we are also looking at how we win in different areas, whether it's winning in smaller initiatives we are taking at work for our personal selves. I think winning personally for personal goals is equally important as for professional goals as well. And when we look at the area we are in today, this is a quote from a very, very long time ago. Ephesus actually was a scientist and physiologist and also a psychologist who was working in Greek times. He was born to a rich family but decided to go and actually think and study philosophy. And through fragment it says, the only thing that is constant is change. And that is never more true than today. His theory was that things are always changing. If you go into a river, you may go into that same river today, and you may enter that river a year later. But it has changed because the river is not the same. It may have different organisms within it. And you're not the same as well because you've gone through different experiences in that 1 year. So while things may seem the same, his theory is that at every point in time, we are going through change. And that change is what we see is really transforming our societies, our industries, our cultures, and our societies as well. So at Frost & Sullivan, we put that all together in what we call megatrends. Now, many companies are looking at megatrends. It is transformative, but it's also far-reaching in its impact. And the key trend that I will focus on today is really more around the social trends that we are seeing from an economy perspective, from a she economy perspective, as an example. So we're seeing social changes. We see transformative forces that are coming are actually happening not just because of technology. You see that technology is one impact. It is also the ability, that span of influence. Because before, when we did not have different platforms. Today, there are so many platforms to actually voice issues, to share issues. That span of influence was really limited. It used to take a long period of time. It took years or months for a song, for example, to reach #1 or to reach 1 million views. When Psy from Korea came out with his song, it took a couple of days to actually hit, or hours to hit 1 million views. So that span of influence today, because of some of these transformative forces, give us the ability to share and learn much more and actually have a much larger impact. So some of the key trends that we are seeing shaping the future from a demographic perspective, I think first of all is educational attainment. So you can see that educational attainment is actually growing regardless of the age group, not just the younger age group, but we are seeing reskilling. We're seeing, not just women, but men and women who are going into the 40s, 50s, 60s, reskilling, learning new skills, and actually going into total different industries as well. So educational attainment is actually growing across. The working age growth, especially in this region, we are seeing a large span in terms of working age growth, as well as the urban population. But what's interesting there is also women participation. So increasingly, we see women participation, but what I'm sure many of you are aware of in your organizations, and I'll share a little bit more about that later, is that We get really good women participation in earlier stages. You know, for example, if you have 10 different levels in your company, we found from the analyses we've done that, you know, level 1 to level 5, you get equal, if not in some cases even more women representation. But it really comes down, you know, it's kind of like going down a steep slope as you go higher and higher on each level. And I'm sure you're aware of what some of the reasons are. Some are inherent, some are also personal, and some are within an organization itself. The other trend that's interesting is the millennials. You know, the millennial woman is quite different, I would say, from the Generation X woman. I have an 18-year-old daughter, and that's why I can say and speak from experience, in the sense that they're much more open, much more willing to put themselves out there, take those risks, walk into the room and say, I deserve that, why shouldn't I get it? So we see that there are different trends that are shaping the way our organizations and cultures will work. Now, the analyses that we drew, you know, we did this based on looking at about 20 different countries and more than 200 organizations across, and we picked up what we thought were some of the most interesting facts that showcase the impact of women on the economy as well as in different areas. So you can see that, you know, from a fiscal perspective, from an economic perspective, from contribution to the economy, and even from a spend perspective and leadership positions, we are continuing to see the growth rates and the impact of women across. Diversity, China actually leads in terms of gender diversity in the Asia-Pacific region. What we also found is that if you look at this region, we've actually had women leaders in countries like Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia and Singapore, despite being closer to home, are actually two countries that have not yet had a female president. So we're kind of lagging from that perspective. But many of the other Southeast Asian countries are actually going towards that. I think Singapore, for now, for the first time, we actually have a woman president, but the prime minister, you know, has continued to be that. So let's look at what we see are next generation women leaders. You know, in a way, that term, we talk about next generation, but I think it's really today. What we have here today in this room, these are the next gen women leaders. It could be it could happen as quickly as next year, in the next 2 years, or even in the next 5 years. So if we look at the global labor force by 2025, you can see that there is a significant increase in terms of labor force projections by women. So more and more women are entering the global workforce. When we look at areas such as STEM, we do see a varied picture, depending on countries. You know, actually, in many countries, the enrollment in STEM is something that governments are looking at, regardless of whether it's men or women. They found that with the internet economy, young people are much more interested in going and doing something that is on a digital platform that will make them overnight millionaires. But so many governments are actually looking at STEM as an area and looking at how they should improve participation and uptake rates for not just women, but overall for their countries. But in STEM, why that has particular focus is traditionally, we have seen that it's more a male-dominated area, areas such as engineering, especially when we look at areas such as petrochemical engineering, which may require different skill sets. But more and more we're seeing, not just biases, but more and more we're seeing women actually getting interested in that area, and organizations being extremely open to hiring women in that area. So with all of that, we do see an expected reduction of 25% in the labor participation rate gap by 2025. I think the participation rate, if we achieve the Brisbane G20 agreement, we will actually achieve that 40% average global female labor participation rate that we're looking at. And, you know, APAC and, you know, ANZ, the whole area is actually pretty close. We are looking at 37% population of women and projected to grow as well to 40 plus. Now, in our analyses of that 200 plus companies that I mentioned earlier, we found that female leadership improves corporate performance. So you can go back and check this for your own organization as well. But when we looked at that, we saw companies that actually had female CEOs had a significant impact on the performance. Those with female board members, you can see that there was actually an increase in 10%. And those with a high participation of female executives, we saw an increase in 10% on net margin, 17% stock price growth, and double operating profit. Now, is this only because they had women in their leadership positions? Not necessarily, but however, what it does is it does bring a different perspective into corporate decisions that are made. When corporate decisions are made by groups that tend to think in a similar way, we end up possibly losing out on new initiatives, new ideas, and new opportunities that we could take forward. That different perspective, we believe, is what actually leads to this performance increase. And we believe that this is a significant enough reason for us to actually achieve or look at how we bring in diversity and female leadership into our companies. We're not saying, I know there's a huge debate on quotas. Should we have a quota? Should we not have a quota? It's the best person for the job, but also being consciously aware that to achieve such performance, we need to actively and consciously look to bring that mix into the fold, whether we bring that mix in from internal promotions or from external, external perspectives as well. So we see that there are three main factors that contribute to increasing women's participation and presence in the workplace and in corporate senior management. I think first, obviously, is the corporate itself, different initiatives that we do. And I think some of the organizations that are speaking today are actually leading in that area. Things such as corporate culture, looking at, the management accountability, pay equality, family leave, and things like that. I think societal as well, not just education, but societal norms, in the sense that when we speak with women, there is still, especially in Asia, in certain countries in Asia, there is still that expectation that it is the woman who needs to ensure that, there's food at home, the kids are settled, the laundry is done, or whatever it is. So societal norms are still there. I remember a very interesting quote from the CEO of PepsiCo, and one of the most famous quotes she shared is, her mother-in-law told her, you can be the CEO of one of the largest companies in the world, I don't care, but when you come home, you're the wife and the mother, so please make sure dinner is ready. And then, of course, from a governmental perspective, when we look at policies, we look at representation, national policies, that encourage companies to consider how they can increase women participation. So I know this is a little bit messy, but we plotted then those 200 plus companies on the perspective of the percentage of women in the organization and the percentage of women in leadership positions. We used their definition of leadership for the company. And we found 5 groups of companies. I think really we have those, we called it delusion of progress, because there were few companies who believed that they were doing extremely well, but not necessarily so. So there were just a few of those. But most companies we found were actually in that leadership challenge, where they had, women, they had a percentage of between 20 to 30% of companies actually had women who were growing into leadership positions, but it was kind of limited. We also had those who were in the leadership stability part, where actually they had platforms and they were looking to develop that even further, and most companies actually fell into that. And then the Boys Club Challenge, that was quite interesting, because the Boys Club Challenge, we saw companies who had more than 50% of women in leadership positions. And we called it the Boys Club Challenge because these are companies that were challenging that traditional boys club, which is, let's go have a few drinks after work, or let's spend Sunday playing golf, when traditionally Sunday is the day I take kids to soccer, for example. So companies that were actually challenging that boys club norm, because they actually had 50% of more women in leadership who were shaping what is actually done from a business perspective, or even from a personal time perspective. So when we looked at some of the differences, I think what is important for us to understand in companies is obviously, I don't have to say, there's obviously a difference between male and female leadership. But what are some of those intrinsic differences? I think the way decisions are actually made, we found that there was a different, absolutely different thought process that came from men and women. Simple things like issuing an RFP. You know, for male managers, we found that issuing an RFP, that's what it is. You know, it's the process is there, put it in, it's done. But for female managers, they actually saw that as a starting point. Oh, is that something that needs to evolve over time? Again, obviously not all men and women are the same, so this is just more from the analysis perspective. There will be exceptions, as always, with many of these rules. But also the management styles, having a more collaborative management style. We found with males, obviously, there was a much stronger push in terms of leadership styles, and also in terms of ethics and motivation. We found that, when you talked, Arvind, earlier about women wanting to move in terms of jobs, actually, we found that males were quite much more willing to move for a 30% pay rise, whereas women looked at the whole package, you know. How will that impact my family? How will that impact my work-life balance? Is the culture of the company suitable for me? So there were a lot more considerations for a woman to actually take that plunge, and we actually found women are much more loyal. As long as the company doesn't screw up big time, they tended to stay. So when we look at that comparative evaluation of management styles, you will see that there are certain strengths that male managers have, and certain strengths that female management have. And then, of course, areas where they have equal capabilities. And this is really one of the fundamental reasons as well that brings in that impact that we saw on corporate performance. Because by blending these together, you actually get an environment and a situation where you're able to bring your corporate capabilities forward in the most, in the most not economic, but have the biggest impact on the organization itself. Whereas if you would have an organization that's very heavily male-focused, you'd only be able to get what's actually on the left-hand side, and if it's very female-focused on the right-hand side. So really that blend, we believe, is what leads to that. Now, with all of these, we also see one is on the corporate side, but I love this one, female economic power. Because women make decisions in terms of spending, not just for themselves, but many a time they make decisions for their families. What is purchased in the household, from whether it's food perspective, whether it's for healthcare. We found women also had increasing influence on even what type of car was purchased. Because when they look at the car, you found it, okay, as opposed to maybe a two-seater sports car, women tend to think of how will this fit in with the family? In fact, that was one of the reasons why sales of SUVs have been growing. And car companies have recognized this. In fact, now rarely did you used to see advertisements with targeting women when they purchase cars. The most common advertisements I remember growing up with for cars were always the flashy car with the pretty lady in the short skirt, and that was the ad that I remembered for cars. But today, we're now seeing ads that actually target women as well. So if you look at, and so that's one perspective from the spending, but even from the earnings perspective, you see that the female economy will be bigger than the economy of China and the United States by 2020. So you can see the economic impact that we have. Purchasing power. So you have increase in buying power, 31 trillion, down up to really 43 trillion by 2020. And these are huge numbers we're talking about. Increase in earning and increase in household spending, all the 3 points that I mentioned earlier. The other area is female entrepreneurship. So when we look at that, nearly 40% of global enterprises will be women-owned in the next decade. Africa, interestingly, is actually one of the fastest growing regions for female entrepreneurship, as is Asia Pacific. So we see more than 30% of enterprises globally are women-owned businesses, and increase in terms of investment of venture capitalists in that area. Social media as well is an area that women dominate, and you can see that span of influence that's actually there. Now, to wrap up, I just want to show you, can we have the video? A perspective of how new business models created by women are actually using those megatrends, the span of influence, the internet economy, social media, to create new businesses and economic impact.
You know how you always need a fresh pair of undies? Well, just tell us what you like and we'll ship them on the regular. First, take our survey so we know your style. Are you a thong girl? What about chickies? Boy shorts or briefs? Maybe one of each? Whatever you want. Pick colors, neutrals, prints. We're gonna be shipping your Abby's straight to your door. So let us know how often you want them. Once a month? Every other month? Or 4 times a year? Then sit back, relax, and we'll deliver purpose and product in a beautiful box. And one last thing, we're flexible, just like our underwear, so you can cancel, skip a month, or modify at any time. Satisfaction guaranteed. These seamless Abby's will be your second skin. Everybody's gonna think that you're wearing no underwear.
So it's a subscription. Who would have thought you can buy underwear on subscription? You choose how many pairs you want, whether you want it monthly, once in 3 months, once in 6 months, and you get billed monthly. So you get a new pair every time. Different choices, customized by prints, different sizes. And that's really what's interesting. But this is an example of really, can I go back to the slides, please? This is an example of the types of businesses, and 10% of that is actually micro-funding businesses for other women as well. So that's what we call the next generation of leadership. Car insurance, it's called Drive Like a Girl. A car insurance company has actually created insurance premium. They found that male drivers, apologies, brake too, harshly, go very close and tailgate. I'm sure you've seen that. You're on the highway and someone's coming really close behind you, so sudden brake. Whereas they found that women drivers, especially younger women, they tend to take their time, more careful. There's less stress on the car. So actually, they created an app to monitor how drivers drove. And if the male drivers drove like a girl, they got reduced premiums. Another impact of the female influence. So to summarize, really what we see is what we call this post-gender economy, a society and business environment in which men and women are equal. And that will help us have this future generation's alter set of beliefs and values. So understand your impact across your business, create your vision for the future, and develop new business models, all things that you have within your span of influence. And with all that, just enjoy the ride and have a great time. Thank you.